Invisible Soldiers podcast.
Welcome to the Invisible Soldiers podcast. I'm your host, Corey.
And I'm Rebecca.
What up, Rebecca?
What up, though, Corey?
How was your week?
It was really, really busy. The shop has been a buzzing from new business to retaining new business. Also, we're coming into spring here in Chicago, so looking forward to longer days. How about you? How was your week?
I'm busy. It's, a good busy. Not underwater right now. Finished up a project. Got 2 or 3 more brewing. So it's a good time. It's a good time right now.
Amazing.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Episode 2. This week, we are with Jason Walker. He's a VP Group Creative Director at Ketchum in Detroit. I consider him a friend, a comrade, and a former colleague. Jason is like a jack of all trades. He is a designer. He's a coder. He's just a super creative, brilliant mind, photographer. But welcome to the podcast, Jason. How you been, man?
I appreciate being on here, man. I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk to both of y'all and ready to get into it.
So let's start with you just kind of telling us a little bit about you, what you do, where you're at, and the kind of stuff you're working on right now.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a group creative director at Ketchum during the day job. So I am working on social content, social media content, producing a lot of content across PR. So that's the interesting thing now is I've kind of shifted from advertising over into PR, which is I'm learning this space now. It's a little different than where we all come from, which is advertising. And then I'd say the side hustle is that I do a lot of photography, filmmaking, video editing, visual art.
That's what's up.
As you said, it's my bread and butter. It's what I've known all my life since I was a kid. Just making things to look at is what I enjoy.
That's really cool. And you've spent your entire career in Detroit, right?
Yeah, I have. It's like one thing would happen, one other thing would happen. There were a couple of close calls where I thought I was going to be out of there, but I love my family here in Detroit. I love my people here in Detroit. So yes, I'm right smack in Southeast Michigan.
Can you talk about that just a little bit? Because we're in an industry where people are always dying to jet set and, jump to the next city. And you've been able to carve out a space and kind of, it sounds like a family work balance that's worked for you in one city.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, the phrase you use, the family work balance. I found that all of us have these ideas. Well, a lot of us are like, man, I'm gonna move to LA. I'm gonna move to New York. And I had those ideas, I had those dreams, but there's also, as with everyone, we're balancing what happens to us in life. I had 2 kids. They're both grown now. One is in college, is a freshman at Michigan State University, and the other one is about to be a junior in high school. So, there were a lot of situations, there were opportunities that popped up where I might have been able to go. But it came down to looking at both of them and conversations with my family and trying to balance. I should add that at the time, there's a divorce in there. There's, the relationship with their mom and all of that kind of thing. Like, how do you balance that with your career aspirations? So talking to 2 of them, it's like, I think I need to stay here. And there's also the fact that I do enjoy that when you're in Detroit, there's a lot of automotive. Like, you can't get around it. There's lots of agencies are doing incredibly well working outside of automotive, but there's a lot of automotive in Detroit because it's Detroit. I've enjoyed that. I enjoy working with all of those clients, all of those companies, and had a good time with it, especially with a background of photography and video and animation and all that kind of stuff. It's fun to play around with that and the kind of artwork you can make.
I love that. I love that. Well, I'm super excited to have you here, Jason, because I am also a native Detroiter. What up, though?
What up, though?
Would love to hear a little bit about your creative influences and being from Detroit. What actually got you to the front door of an ad agency? What led you in that space?
It's funny. I should say probably the blanket statement when I was a kid, like a lot of the art school kids, just growing up, constantly drawing, constantly like influenced by cartoons and animation and all that stuff. One of the early influences I think that kind of really piqued me, if y'all remember Reading Rainbow, obviously. LeVar Burton, Reading Rainbow.
Reading Rainbow.
Reading Rainbow, man. There was an episode because LeVar Burton is on there. And of course, he was, it's the 80s. So he's on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I'm flying my nerd flag real hard.
Oh, right with you. Live long and prosper, Jason.
See, and there was an episode he had on Reading Rainbow in the 80s, where he talked about he went to the filming of Star Trek The Next Generation and showed how they did their visual effects. And my little, I'm assuming like maybe 9 or 10-year-old mind was cracked wide open because I had never seen anything like that where he's showing like, oh, when they're filming the Starship on Star Trek, they flip it upside down and run the camera over the back. And when they're putting together the little, the other little spaceships that might appear, they're grabbing things from around the house and spray painting them. And I was just like, bro, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know I could just grab stuff around the house and paste it together and paint it. And so that's all I was doing was just grabbing stuff around the house and gluing it together and spray painting it and all that kind of thing. And it just, I think between that and I had an older sister who actually was in advertising as well. She worked at BBDO at one point. She was a proofreader at Wonderman. She also worked as a DJ. She was a DJ at 93.1 in Detroit in the 80s. And so all of that together, I was constantly exposed to the idea that media, tech, visual effects, art, all of that, it's not as out of your grasp as you think it is. I can get to this. I can do this. I see all these people doing it. I see my sister doing it. I'm seeing these things on TV like, oh, they make it like that. I can try to make it like that. And it just inspired me to pursue that through school, pursue that through high school and into college, the College of Creative Studies in Detroit. And I think that's where I got started. That's what really just kind of drove me. And then I'll say very quickly, my older brothers owned a business in Southfield, Michigan. And my one brother, I was 14 years old, it's 1993, and he started a desktop publishing business. And so this is 93. He owns a computer. Both of us both know, all of the three of us know, how many black folks with computers. And so he's in there with Ventura PageMaker and stuff like that. And that was the first time I saw somebody take a computer, scan an image, visually manipulate it, and he put my picture on a dollar. And this is 1993. So again, my head is cracked wide open. I didn't know you could do that. And so seeing that, and he actually hired me. He's like, okay, you can work for me for whatever. I can't remember what he paid me, but I'm 14 riding my bike up there after high school. It was amazing. And those kind of things are I think it just set me on the road to understand that all of this is attainable. It is within my reach. I can play around with this stuff. It's not the thing that other people do. It's something that I can actually do.
So when you started to identify your talents and really get serious about this thing, how did you find your tribe? Because it seems like in everybody's story, they have to find their tribe, or they usually find their tribe right around that time they start to get serious about it. So how did you find your tribe of creatives and people who thought the same way?
What's funny? It was a combination of things. I think so. I should say that when I went to College for Creative Studies for less than a year, I went for a semester and frankly, I dropped out because I wasn't ready. It's something that's driven me as I've grown, as I've dealt with my own 2 children, to talk to them about what college means and what education means. Because at the time I was just like, look, bro, I don't know what it is. My family, that I came from a blue collar family. I tried that. And then when I dropped out of that, I went to work for my brother again in 1998. They brought me in, and at the time they needed a network administrator. They're like, you're young, you're cheap, come in here, we'll pay you like $5. You can be our network admin. I remember one day I was working there, he threw, what was it, Microsoft Image Ready, I think it was. He threw it on my desk and was like, learn that, build a website. I'm like, all right, bet. What's a website? So I had to figure that out.
What's a website?
I'm like, because it was like 98. I'm like, I don't know. Well, okay, I'll figure out how to build a website. And so somewhere in there, I was introduced to some folks. There was a young woman, it's funny, back to Invisible Soldiers. There was this young woman who was a IT specialist and database coder in Chicago. We met online, and of course, this is 98, so it was all kinds of like CompuWare or something like that, CompuServe. And she introduced me to, this is the game. She basically introduced the game to me. Here's how you freelance. Here's how you stop using that program. Here, actually, you need to start working in Photoshop. I'm like, okay, cool. What's Photoshop? That kind of stuff. And so I think she was one of those first folks that showed me there was a tribe to be had, that there were some of us doing this kind of work, how to navigate the space, how to do that. And then probably right around 2000-ish, something like that, is when I started to get introduced to the folks that that whole neighborhood of early bloggers, like when blogging was first coming out, and Blogger was the space. It wasn't medium.com yet, it was Blogger. I don't think WordPress was out yet, movable type, all that wasn't out yet. And I found this whole community of Black folks that were on Blogger, that were on these, that were making their own websites, that were coding their own websites, designing their own websites. Folks like yourself, Corey, folks like Honey Young and all that kind of stuff. Like it was amazing back then. One of the things I love is that a lot of those folks now, they're doing amazing work. They're doing amazing things. But I remember them starting out in those spaces of like, we're just building these little tiny websites and trying to figure out how it all works and finding our own voices.
When I met you, you were the first Black coder I ever met. And you were like, hey, I got this website. And I was like, okay. So you showed me. And I was like, damn, this is dope. Remember what I said? I was like, I want one. So Jason hooked up my first website and introduced me to this whole circle of people. And like he said, this is pre any of the social media apps. Even I think the first one that I remember it was like a journal. What was the one?
Was it Live Journal?
Live Journal. That's it.
Yeah.
That was it.
That's funny how that popped up in my head.
Yeah, Live Journal was about 2003 or 4 because it made the idea of coding and all of that so much easier because they had a template now, right? But before that, it was people who were coding and they had these websites. And yeah, you introduced me to that world. So that was really cool.
I appreciate the question because that was the thing. It's like you said about finding a tribe. It was the importance of finding like-minded folks especially when you're trying to learn something, when you're trying to introduce yourself to a space, you're trying to pick it up. When you can get to a space and find that there are other folks that are also stumbling and I tried this and it broke, I tried that and it broke, it didn't work. It's invaluable. And I think that finding a space of other folks that were playing around with code and they looked like me, they talked like me, they were interested in the same things as me, they came from the same places as I did. We were able to play around and experiment and, oh, look what he did on his website. Look what she was doing over here. She the best over here, all that kind of stuff. You can't put a price on that. And it makes you better. It makes you continue pursuing the thing as opposed to like, it's very hard to continue pursuing a passion sometimes when you're doing it alone in your house, unless you have a community that can support you and say, let's all build on this together.
That's amazing. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how you navigated your career in agency life, not only as a person of color, but I think what's also interesting is that you are one of the pioneers of what digital marketing does as well. So like, I remember being at CE and the digital department was like 2 people. And it was this thing that clients were going to try to see, what are we going to do with this? But we're not going to put a lot of dollars in there. So would love to hear about, as a pioneer in this space, what was it like to navigate there, especially as we talk about invisible soldiers and those that you've been able to find. But how has ad life been for you?
It's really interesting because the first thing I want to say is shout out to my first creative director, Chris Zentek. Back at Campbell U-All, when I was like, I had to be like a little snot-nosed 22-year-old or something like that. And this was right after I had started working for my brothers and I was starting to learn, like, I think I started teaching myself, which is now Adobe Flash, rest in peace, Flash. But I started to learn animation and all that stuff and coding, a little bit of web design. But he hired me and that was my way in the door. And as you said, Rebecca, I got in the door there working, on the early websites, working on like an early Chevy.com, stuff like that. I think it's one of the things that's worked well for me is I am lucky to be working in a field and with a skill set where there's so much room for, it's kind of like it's still a little bit of the Wild West. It was definitely the Wild West back then, but there's still a little bit of the Wild West because it's changing so quickly. If you can stay on top of it, if you can stay fresh and stay interested, if you can stay interested, there's always something new to learn. And it's funny. It's one of those things where as we get older, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And all of those things we picked up from the early years in the 2000s and the late 90s of design and coding and basic animation. I was joking recently about some of the stuff we were doing back there, like making CD-ROMs and stuff like that. All of that, it builds on top of each other so that you get, you're now in a day when as all of us are, we reach management. We're the ones that the veterans now, we're the ones that are looked to be leadership. we can now lean on those things. Like, I remember those days when we were just all trying to figure it out. So that part is a lot of fun. And I think to the other part of your question, I think there's the component, and I also want to give a nod to all the folks who might be going through this, the imposter syndrome that a lot of us go through, where even outside of advertising, how you can get into a space and there's this element of, do I deserve to be here? Do I deserve to be in this room? Am I smart enough to be here? All of these folks seem so talented. All these folks seem so intelligent. I think the main thing that's changed, the main kind of like corner I turned in my career is recently hitting a spot where I felt a little more comfortable in my creative voice, a little more comfortable in like, okay, yeah, I know a thing or two. Okay, I know something. I know I can rest a little more in my creative voice and understand, because of where I come from, the way I grew up, all of that influences my voice now and allows me to say like, yeah, no, I got something to bring to the table. With age, you have a little bit of understanding of what you have going on.
Exactly. So when you were young and you were navigating that world, were there any other people that could provide a little mentorship for you, or people who look like you, invisible soldiers nearby to kind of lean on?
You like I mean, honestly, I can't go past like getting into, again, walking into somewhere like, when you walk into a big ad agency. I should say that when I started, I remember, I believe it was Aquin who placed me with Campbell Ewald. And I remember talking to one of the reps at Aquin, and she's like, yeah, there's a role you might fit for at Campbell Ewald. And I'm like, all right, cool. What's Campbell Ewald? And I remember she was just kind of dumbfounded, like, how have you never heard of that company?
Wow.
But I was young. And then I think that getting in there, seeing faces like yours, seeing like our good friend Mike Metcalf, seeing some of the other folks we know there, like, oh, we have a place here. There are some of us here. There's something for us. There's room for us here. Like, it's important. And it was a big deal for me. It's just, it can go a long way to like, on those days, like, no, there's some of us here. There's some folks you can lean on.
Corey and I talk a lot about that in terms of that in-person experience, like walking past someone's office and being like, oh, snap. Like, I remember the first time I saw Corey, he was in an office, or the first time I saw Mike Metcalf and we saw Kevin Stone and a few others. It was a nice handful of us that were there. Any recommendations now that we are in this virtual world for younger and mid-level talent to connect with us, because now it's not as organic or as easy. Like, for example, not that you need to shout out all your socials, you can, but like, what are you doing or how are you trying to close that gap or fill that void in terms of how we're not necessarily always together now?
It's funny because I've been trying to figure this out now. The role I'm in now, I'm actually fully remote. There is no Ketchum office in Detroit. There's a Ketchum office in Chicago. Set meetings constantly. You need to reach out to somebody. I love one of the things I'm finding with some of my colleagues, some of the folks I'm working with, even the younger folks, older folks, reach out, say, let's hop on Zoom, half hour, let's talk, make it regular, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. It's actually a thing that we talk about very often is you have to make up for the fact that now there's so much to be gained when you walk down the hallway. When all of us, when it was all in person 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in between meetings, when you're walking down the hallway and you're like, hey, you're catching up all that stuff, that's not there. So you have to make up for that by making sure you are regularly, bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, whatever works for you, set meetings, check in. It can be as long or short as you want, but you have to constantly be checking in. So it's not just about the current project you're on. It's just, how's things going? What's going on with you? How's life at home? All that kind of stuff. Because it's really important. And I think it's going to be the way that we're able to pass on the important information that some of the younger talent needs.
That's really insightful. I've known Jason for like over 20 years, and we stay in contact, even though, we look up and maybe a year or two has passed and we haven't talked, but like we're always like, it's a text, it's in the DMs or something. But about a year ago, you hit me up, phone call. I was like, oh, Jason calling. What's going on? You had some stuff on your mind, and just kind of like what you were talking about, you wanted to chop it up and bounce some things off from me and get a different perspective. And I appreciate your ability to have no ego and to just, have no problem reaching out. And we had a great talk, and that talk wasn't just good for you. It was great for me because it was a little therapy session for me as well, So why don't we do that more? There's a shared experience. We work in these silos, but there is a shared experience. There's a collective experience that is happening, and we don't talk about it enough. We don't reach out and check on people, check in, support people. Sometimes I think ad life creates a bit of a competitive spirit in you that is hard to turn off. I think you're always trying to win. You're always trying to show you can do it. You're always trying to figure it out yourself, right? And we forget to reach out to other people in our community. I wish we did more of that.
I think for me, it's the bit in what you said about ego. First of all, I should really start off by saying, let me not play. My wife, like in those times when, because there were roles that were coming up and I wanted to get your opinion, like, all right, I know Corey's been in the game forever. Let me get his, you would know, let me get his opinion. And I'm talking that kind of stuff with my wife, and she like, stop playing, call. Because there is the ego. There's the ego, like
Yeah.
you don't want to look stupid. You don't want to admit that you don't know. I think that all of us are in a space where we don't want to admit that we don't know, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's one-on-one. We get in these spaces and it's like, we don't want to just flat out say, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I need your opinion. I was fortunately in that I recognized the importance, and with her nudging of like, no, you need to ask. And I think along the lines of what you're saying, some of us struggle more than others, but you just do yourself a service when you recognize that getting with the right folks who understand your background, who understand where you come from, there's an understanding there that you don't have to fill in the gaps of what it's like for us in these spaces. You know what it's like. You've been there. You know, walking into some of these rooms, what it can feel like. And I don't have to give you that code. You know that code. And so when I ask you, how do I navigate this? When I ask you, what do I do? What do I do now that I'm moving up in leadership? How does this work? You know the way I'm asking that question. And so
Right.
that's important. And I think that I hope that we can explain it to more of the younger folks as they're coming up. I hope that they see it. I know, again, from my two, that I've been trying to explain that to them.
What's funny is when you called me, I'm like, sometimes you just have to remind people of who they are. I'm like, Jason, you dope as hell, dude. Like, what are you worried about? Like for real. Like, do you know who you are? And then you're like, oh yeah.
Show them who you are.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
No, I mean, it really, and that's the thing. It's something that, again, even talking at home with my wife and her friends and some of my own friends, we all forget sometimes, like who we are, our skill set,
Our value.
our value. If we're lucky, we have folks surrounding us. And it's the importance of having the right circle around you. Folks that can remind you of your value, of what you can bring to the table. They know, like, I know your background. I know what you can do. I'm going to nudge you a little bit. I'm going to tell you how great you are. It is huge. It's huge. And I feel for those that don't have that community around them or that group around them, that circle that can be like, no, we got you. You good. You know what you're doing.
I love that. I was wondering if we could maybe pivot into, we've kind of tinkered around with calling it some hot topics and going a little off script, but kind of in script too. But would love to hear one of the things that Corey and I talked a lot about coming out of 2020, the work that we were doing, how it closely aligns, or we hope that it closely aligns to, our values. We've had a lot of clients and marketers make a lot of promises. Some have fallen on deaf ears, agency cultures. They've said a lot of things. Would love to hear your POV. It's been 3 years now. Are you feeling any positive impacts? Are you seeing any headwinds in a lot of the things that we face in this industry being, somewhat invisible?
I think a lot of places are trying. I think you get to a space where there's a lot of value to what we're talking about how we need to back each other up. Some of the conversations I have with some of the younger talent that I work with, in the past, over the years, just making sure that there's going to be gaps. There's only so much a lot of agencies can do. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to rely on that too much. And I think I want to make sure that when we walk in some of these rooms, I think all of us have dealt with some of these folks that come in, that look like us, and they maybe someone is looking at them a little funny because of how they talk. maybe someone is looking at them a little funny because they seem a little defensive, especially for Black women, especially like, she seems a little angry. She seems a little like she trying to push everybody back. There's a certain understanding we have around that experience and where that might come from, some of the things that might influence that. And I think more than any other agency can do, we have to rely. I know I personally want to be able to, I want to be able to reach over and be like, look, I'm going to try to have your back on this, especially as we start to move up the ladder, to be like, as best as we can, to try to block a little bit, to try to lean in a little bit, to give them a little extra nudge, all those kind of things, because it's important. And I don't know. I feel like I might be copping out on your question a little bit, but I think it just makes me think about how important it is that we do some of this work ourselves.
I agree. Together, I believe that there's a grand opportunity for more solidarity in what we do from top to bottom, from the mentoring that we do, hiring, equity, just all the conversations in general. And I love that you see the value of investing in ourselves. Would love to hear your thoughts on, I hear this a lot, and I don't know if it's true just because I am not in the creative space, but they say that there's a bit of a rift between generations or misunderstandings. Do you find that to be true? Are young people taking feedback? Are they reaching to you? Or is it like, oh, this old head, this uncle, he doesn't get it?
Right. You know what's funny about that is I don't see it. I know this is like a hot take that like it's surprising, but I think there's a part of me that has always felt like whenever people pose that, like, oh, these kids don't listen, man. I told you they don't listen. It's like that's the exact same thing they said about us. It's the exact same thing they said about us. There's differences. I think one thing that does happen is I think that the younger generation, they have a vocabulary we didn't have. I think they have an understanding of what work means, how to discuss the value of work in the workplace. They have an understanding of how to talk about like all the words you can toss out there, like gaslighting and all those kind of things. We didn't have those. We didn't have that vocabulary. So I think they can come across as, oh, they don't want to work. I think they feel better armed to say some of those things. But I just can't help but think about the folks that I know that I've worked with over the years that are younger who seem they're perfectly willing to kill it. They're perfectly willing to get out here and like to put in the hours that are necessary to do what's necessary. I think the only difference is, and kind of back to your other question, Rebecca, I think everybody's having a conversation about I'm not going to kill myself for your company. I think from the
Yes.
younger generation to the older generation, all of us are starting to, especially tied to the pandemic, all of us are ready to say, look, bruh, yes, I want to do good work. I want to come in and do amazing work with you. I want to bring value to the table, but I am not going to kill myself for you, for your company. Like, and I do agree with the idea. I wholeheartedly agree with the idea of having a healthy conversation around what it means and how many hours we should be working, how much we should be putting in, and where that value should go. And if they're saying that, if the younger folks are saying that, I support it because there were things that all of us were asked to do that maybe we shouldn't have been asked to do that. Maybe we shouldn't have been asked to put on all those kind of hours.
Wow. No, it's definitely changed. I mean, there was a time when if a creative director said, "Hey, I want you to write some headlines," you walked in with 25 to 50 headlines, right? And then I saw the gradual change to 6 or 7. And it was like, wait, what happened? you
Yeah.
know? And if you keep holding on to that perceived notion of what hard work is versus the changing, like I struggle with that a little bit, right? Because I came up the other way where it was you're gonna stay here until it's done. And I don't care if, your weekend is ruined kind of thing. It's like, okay, cool. It's different now. It's like, oh, I gotta do this and I gotta do this. Pins are gonna be down for a little while, but I'll reach out to you when I get a chance. It's just different.
Man, listen, and the thing is too with that, and I'm gonna misquote it a little bit because it was something I saw on LinkedIn recently, and I really wish I had it in front of me so I could quote it correctly. It was one of those posts that was talking about one of our ad guys had basically said that they were talking about the idea of how to write a memo properly. And what he was saying was one of the things in all that bulleted list of how to write a memo properly, because it was like said in the late 80s, like late 70s, early 80s. He's like, hey, write it and then don't send it the same day, read it the next morning. And the thing that came to my mind is That tells you a lot about the time, because how often do we have the time to write an email, sit on it, send it the next morning? We got 5 seconds to send that email. And I say that because what you're saying, Corey, at the same time, there's absolutely a conversation we need to have around talent, like folks that like there were used to be, we would bring in 3 concepts, 6 concepts, however many concepts. Now that's dwindling down. The demands are raising. Like what we're asked to do is changing. So like everything is speeding up. When we could write 25 headlines, we had a little more time to write 25 headlines. You know what I'm saying? So it's like there's clearly you might tell from some of the stuff I'm saying, there's a theme for me that there's a thing around demands and time. I really think we need to have a conversation. We need to continue this conversation around demands and time. And it is incredibly important to bring value to the table. It's incredibly important to say, what am I doing for the people that I'm working with? Look to the guy, the person next to you, look to the person to the right of you. What are you doing to help them out and hold it down for your team? And what is your team being asked to do?
Yeah. So tell me this then. Quality. Let's talk quality then, right? Do you think the quality has changed? Because for me, the quality has definitely changed overall. There's great work still out there. Like there are things that inspire me every day. But on a totality, and I struggle because I don't know if this is because I'm at a different stature now, right, than I was. But there was a time when I was younger, I felt like I could grab a CA and just flip through it for hours and just wow, 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 right? I don't find myself saying or giving up that same wow as often as I used to.
Yeah, I think where I end up landing on that is it gets back to that whole thing about, the way media is right now. The whole conversation we're having around like, why is every movie a reboot? Because every movie's a reboot because they know that if they go back to, you're more likely to go to the movies to see the next Avengers than you are to necessarily pay attention to everything everywhere all at once, because you've never heard of everything everywhere all at once. But I know what the Avengers is. I know what the reboot of the Golden Girls is. I'm going to go see that. you know, I bring that up because it becomes this, it's all moving so quickly and there's so much of it that, again, back to the thing of time,
Time, ding, ding, ding.
is time.
That's it.
We need to move so quickly. It also, Corey, to your question, it makes me think about projects that I worked on where there were teams where like, oh, it's all moving so quickly. I know the work that we're putting out isn't all that good. It's like, it could be better, but the time is short. We got to go. We got to go. We got to go. But then we'll hit the spot with this one account team and this one strategy team where they're like, no, go ahead, take a minute. Go ahead, take a minute and sit with it. And then what we bring back is like, no, this is good. This is actually really good. The headlines are good. The idea is solid because we had a second to think about it. You know what I mean? We had a second to mess around with it and question it and say, but could it be better? Could it be this? And then we went back in and those teams gave us feedback. The strategy gave us feedback, an account gave us feedback. And then we had great conversations with the client. And it's like, yeah, we made this something good, as opposed to, no, you got 5 minutes. And when you got 5 minutes, you're going to get a half written ad with like a couple of colors that we made in on my iPad. That's it. Because that's all I had time for.
It's all I had time for. Would love to hear your thoughts pivoting to, thinking about that time, but even like an organic idea. Corey once told me this story about in the early days, uncovering music, to push the culture or to push the idea, not having enough time to uncover things that bring an organic feel to, I guess, the creative. And just thinking about now how all of the agencies are saying things like we come at it from like a diverse perspective and we know culture. And now that things are just so saturated, I would love to hear your thoughts on trying to get to that really great idea under the clock.
The idea of diversity, I think at its core, it can't be overstated. Just the simple idea. I think diversity now, it's the lightning rod that we all know it is, the dog whistle that we all know it is. But underneath, what we're really saying is when you have a bunch of people, if you have a bunch of people in the room that all think the same, you're not going to get good stuff, because no one's going to question the best ideas came out of folks prodding at it and poking at it, saying, actually, what if you came at it this way and what if you did this instead? And I think that some agencies are they're all talk. Aren't really doing that work. And then some really do seem to be building the kind of atmosphere where they really do want. And I find it's funny. I can think of teams and leadership in my past that acknowledged we can't have everybody that looks the same and thinks the same and talks the same, because when that does, it just doesn't make good work doesn't come out of that. And I just feel like you're going to get better work. You're going to get better work when you can punch at the thing, flip it upside down, try to break it, and really try to push where it goes.
All right, man. We've reached our final question. I'm going to throw this one out there to you. In 2023, do you feel like you're invisible in this industry? Do you care? And if you do, what steps do you plan to make to become more visible?
I feel like what I bring to the table, what makes me up, sometimes that feels invisible. I think that there can be assumptions that can happen that it makes me think of something that my sister talked about once. This was years and years ago. She was talking about she was dating some guy. And this is for all our Detroit folks. They were like, I think that essentially she was like, because we all lived in Oak Park, she was like, the guy she was dating was like, how often do you get to the city? And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm there all the time. And he was very surprised by that. And I think throughout the conversation, basically, the guy ended up being surprised by her point of view that, like, she's connected to Detroit. She's family, Detroit is family. Detroit is our people. Is like, he was surprised by that. And the point being was that we don't always wear what we come from on our shoulder the same way. Like, we don't wear it on our sleeve. You might have grown up broke. You might have grown up like I grew up with my dad being, he got out of the Navy in 1979, whatever, and we moved to Detroit and he couldn't find a job. And, he's trying to feed 5 kids and you ended up being a repairman at an arcade in like Hazel Park or something like that. Point being, sometimes I feel like, again, back to the thing about diversity, where I come from, the way I was brought up, the people I was surrounded by, my family, my friends, the streets I ran on, all that stuff, it makes me who I am. And I think there could be certain assumptions in certain rooms that you didn't come up that way, that you didn't come from that. And it makes me think about the conversations we've all had, like, what was that? They talk about a certain song. You brought that up, Rebecca, when there's music. Everybody knows Hey Jude, right? No, I didn't grow up listening to Hey Jude. I don't know the words to Hey Jude. I grew up listening to Anita Baker and Angela Bofield. That's what I heard in my house. And so that influences who I am. And I think that kind of thing, to me, Invisible Soldier, is how do I bring all of that to the table authentically and as who I am, especially in places where I feel like they don't really necessarily see that. And how do I reach over to the other folks and I can give, giving them a nod and understanding, like, I know that you know some of that stuff. I know you grew up with some of those same songs. I know you grew up in some of those same neighborhoods. I know you were on some of those same streets. Like, I know that when you say that thing in a meeting, I know why you said that thing, because we came from the same place, because we came up from that. And that's important to me. To me, that for that, it does matter to me. And if Invisible Soldier to me means I'm a secret agent, yeah, I'm a secret agent. I'm trying to help us out.
Wow. That was a word, man. That was a bar. Well, Jason, thanks, man, for joining. This has been tremendous. We enjoyed it deeply. Do you want to share your socials to any young people out there who might want to follow up with you?
Yeah, my Instagram is the easiest thing. This ain't Jason. And it's just like it sounds. This ain't AINT Jason on Instagram. When you get on there, I know a lot of that stuff is old, bro, but I'm gonna update it. It's coming. but that's the main one. You can start there. You can find my website from there. That's the most important one.
Cool beans, man. This has been a joy, and thank you, everyone out there. We appreciate you tuning in. Be on the lookout for the next episode of the Invisible Soldiers podcast. Subscribe today wherever you listen to podcasts. Peace.